Red Hollow was the kind of town that held onto history like dust clinging to boots. Nothing left Isaline old grudges, not old fences, and certainly not old sorrow. Inside the narrow Saddlemaker's shop on Main Street, the scent of leather oil and worn hide hung thick in the air. Sunlight slipped through the front window, catching in the fine dust that floated lazily above the wooden floor. Xander Hale worked in steady silence. His hands were broad and scarred, marked by years of needles, awls, and ranch work long before that. He preferred leather to people. Leather made sense. If it cracked, you treated it. If it tore, you stitched it. If it weakened, you reinforced it. People were rarely so simple. He leaned over his workbench, pulling waxed thread tight through a saddle skirt that had split near the cantle. The rhythm was calming: push, pull, tighten. Push, pull, tighten. The bell above the shop door chimed. "I'll be with you in a moment," he said, without looking up. Bootsteps crossed the floor, firm and measured, not hesitant. Xander felt the shift in the air before he saw her. "I won't take long," the woman said. He glanced up. Georgia Whitaker stood in the doorway, sunlight framing her silhouette. She wore a practical riding skirt, dusted at the hem, and a fitted jacket that had seen real work. Her chestnut hair was braided loosely over one shoulder, wisps escaping from the wind. There was strength in the way she carried herself, chin lifted, shoulders squared. But there was something else too: weariness. "Miss Whitaker," Xander said, straightening. "Georgia," she corrected gently. "I brought something that needs your hands." She stepped forward and set a saddle carefully onto his workbench. It was an older piece, beautifully tooled, floral patterns, faint but elegant. The leather was dry, edges curled from neglect. "My father's," she said quietly. Xander ran his fingers over the seat, then along the billets. The cinch strap was torn nearly through. "It's been sitting unused," he observed. Her jaw tightened. Since he passed, understanding settled between them. "I'm sorry," he said. She nodded once, as if grief were something to acknowledge quickly and move past. "I need it repaired. Properly." "For riding?" he asked. "For selling." The word landed heavy. Xander looked at her more carefully. "You're selling the ranch?" "Yes." The Whitaker Ranch stretched across the northern valley, rolling grassland. Strong water access, solid barns. It had been one of the oldest family holdings in the territory. "That land's part of Red Hollow," he said quietly. "It's part of my debt," she replied. Silence pressed in around them. "My father borrowed heavily after the drought 2 years back," she continued. "I didn't know how much until the bank papers arrived. I can't maintain the cattle and settle the note alone. A buyer is coming Saturday." Xander felt something twist in his chest. "Who?" "Henry Caldwell, railroad investor." That explained everything. Caldwell had been carving through nearby towns, laying track where ranch land once stretched. Xander looked down at the saddle again. "You want it presentable." "I want it strong," she said. "Strong enough to prove the ranch was cared for." He lifted the saddle, weighing it in his hands. "The leather's dry, but it's good quality. It can be saved." "Can it?" Softly, and he wasn't sure she meant the saddle. He met her eyes. They were steady, but beneath them lay exhaustion and pride. "I'll replace the cinch, reinforce the billets, oil the hide, and check the tree," he said. "It'll hold."
"How long?"
3 days. That's all I have." He hesitated. "Payment can wait." Her eyes flashed. "I don't want pity." "It's not pity," he replied evenly. "It's respect for craftsmanship." She studied him, weighing the truth in his voice. 3 days, she repeated. When she turned to leave, a gust of wind pushed the door wide, sending dust swirling across the floor. She stepped into the bright afternoon and mounted her horse with practiced ease. Xander stood in the doorway, watching her ride north toward land she might soon lose. He carried the saddle back to his bench and began working oil into the cracked leather. Push, pull, tighten. Some things could be mended with patience. He just wasn't sure yet whether Georgia Whitaker's future was one of them. The saddle was nearly finished when Georgia returned. It was late afternoon, and golden light poured through the shop window, warming the polished leather in Xander's hands. He had replaced the cinch strap with sturdy new hide, reinforced the billets, and treated every inch of the old saddle with oil until it gleamed with quiet dignity. The bell above the door rang softly. "I had a feeling you'd still be working," Georgia said. Xander glanced up. She looked more tired than before. Dust clung to her skirt, and there were faint shadows beneath her eyes. "Ranch work doesn't pause for worry," he replied. She stepped closer to the bench. Her fingers hovered over the saddle before resting gently against it. "It looks like it used to. It'll ride like it used to, too." She traced the stitching. "My father bought this the year I turned 10. Said if I was old enough to ride fence lines alone, I was old enough to have a proper saddle. He must have trusted you." "He did." The softness in her voice lingered longer than she intended. Xander cleared his throat. "Caldwell arrives tomorrow." "Yes, mid-morning." She hesitated. He sent a telegram confirming. Xander's jaw tightened at the name. Henry Caldwell wasn't just a buyer, he was an opportunist. Railroads brought growth, but they also brought fences, noise, and land carved into pieces for profit. "You've walked the property with him before?" Xander asked. "Once. He asked about water access first." She gave a humorless smile. "Not cattle, not soil, just water. It tells you what he wants." "Yes." Silence fell between them, heavier than before. Georgia stepped back, folding her arms. "I spent the morning tallying the herd. If I sold half the cattle and leased the south pasture, I might stretch the funds another month." "Another month isn't a solution," Xander said gently. "I know that." Her composure cracked then just slightly. "I grew up believing the land was permanent," she admitted. "That no matter what changed, the ranch would remain. Now I walk through the barn and feel like I'm already a stranger there." Xander set down his tools. "You don't sound like someone who wants to sell." "Want has nothing to do with it. It should." She looked at him sharply. "You speak like a man who hasn't faced foreclosure papers." His gaze darkened. "I have." The words silenced her. "My father gambled away our ranch," he continued quietly. "Left debts behind. I watched strangers ride across fields I'd worked since I was a boy." George's expression softened. "I didn't know. Most don't." He leaned against the bench, meeting her eyes. "Losing land isn't just financial. It's like losing part of yourself." Her breath caught slightly. Then, "You understand why I can't fight something I can't win," she whispered. "Or maybe," he said carefully, "you haven't looked at every way to fight." She stared at him. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting Caldwell isn't your only option." She shook her head. "The bank wants full payment or a signed sale contract. I don't have investors. I don't have partners." The word hung between them. Xander didn't speak immediately. He studied the saddle instead, running his hand along the smooth leather. "You have 2 weeks before the final note is due," he said. "Yes. And if Caldwell doesn't meet your price, they'll auction it." A flicker of fear crossed her face, quick but unmistakable. Xander stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she felt his presence. "Then, don't let it reach auction," he said quietly. "And how exactly do you expect me to stop it?" she asked. He hesitated. Only a second. "By refusing to give up before the last stitch is pulled tight." She looked at him, truly looked at him, as if seeing more than just a saddlemaker standing in a dusty shop. "You speak like you still believe in miracles," she said. "No," he replied softly. "I believe in work." Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window. Georgia picked up the restored saddle. It looked strong now, whole again. "I'll ride this tomorrow," she said. "One last time before he decides its fate." "And yours?" Xander asked. She paused at the door. "My fate isn't decided yet." For the first time since she walked into his shop, there was something new in her voice. Not resignation, but resistance. Saturday morning broke clear and bright, as if the sky itself refused to acknowledge what was at stake. Georgia saddled her horse before sunrise. The restored leather creaked softly beneath her hands, strong, steady, dependable. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember being 10 years old, her father lifting her into that very saddle and telling her that good leather, like good character, lasted if you cared for it properly. She swallowed the memory down. Dust stirred along the road just before mid. Henry Caldwell arrived precisely on time. His carriage gleamed black beneath the sun, polished to a city shine that looked out of place against the wide, wind-worn valley. He stepped down in tailored trousers and a fitted coat, his boots too clean for ranch soil. "Miss Whitaker," he greeted smoothly. Mr. Caldwell. Georgia stood tall, hat brim low against the light. She refused to appear uncertain. "I trust you've had time to consider my offer," he said. "I've considered it," she replied carefully, "but I expect full value for the land." Caldwell's smile was thin. Sentiment often inflates perceived value. "It isn't sentiment," she said firmly. "It's fertile grazing ground to natural water sources and established structures." He glanced around the yard with detached interest. "And aging fences, outdated barns, and limited labor." Her jaw tightened. They walked the property together. Georgia pointed out the creek bed, the north pasture, the windbreak her grandfather had planted decades ago. Caldwell listened, but his eyes measured distances, not memories. When they returned to the barn, Xander stood waiting. He had arrived earlier, under the simple pretense of checking the saddle's fit. In truth, he couldn't stay away. Watching from a distance felt impossible. Caldwell noticed him immediately. "And you are Xander Hale." "Ah." Caldwell's gaze swept over him dismissively. "A craftsman, a ranch, survives on craftsmen," Xander replied evenly. Georgia shot him a brief look, half warning, half gratitude. Caldwell turned back to her. "My final offer stands. Payment in full within the week." "That's lower than your first offer," she said sharply. "Market conditions fluctuate." "No," she replied, voice steady. "You assume I'm desperate." Caldwell's expression didn't change, but the air shifted. "You are," he said plainly. Silence fell heavy in the barn. Georgia felt heat rise in her chest. Not fear, but anger. "I won't be pressured," she said. Caldwell adjusted his gloves. "The bank may see matters differently. Without my purchase, foreclosure is inevitable." Xander stepped forward slightly. "There are other solutions." Caldwell's eyes flicked toward him. "If you possess the capital to cover her debts, by all means." The challenge hung there. Georgia felt it tooth the weight of impossible numbers pressing down. Caldwell checked his pocket watch. "You have until Wednesday. After that, my offer withdraws." He tipped his hat lightly and walked toward his carriage. Dust rose behind him as he left. The silence that followed felt louder than his words. Georgia stood still, hands clenched at her sides. "He lowered the offer because he thinks I have no choice," she said quietly. "He's counting on fear," Xander replied. She turned toward him. "And he isn't wrong." "Yes, he is." She stared at him. Xander took a slow breath. "How much do you owe the bank?" She hesitated. Only a moment before telling him, the figure landed between them like a stone. He nodded once, calculating. "I have savings," he said. Her eyes widened. "No, I didn't say all of it," he continued. "But enough to negotiate. Enough to buy time." "You would risk your shop?" she asked, disbelief mixing with something softer. "It's wood and walls," he said. "You're talking about land that's been in your family for generations. That's not your burden. Maybe it's my choice." The wind moved through the barn doors, stirring hay at their feet. Georgia searched his face. "Why would you do this?" He didn't look away. "Because I know what it feels like to watch someone take what you love," he said quietly. "And because I don't believe you want to sell." Her breath caught. For the first time since her father's passing, someone had spoken to the truth she kept buried. "I'm tired of fighting alone," she admitted. "Then don't." The words were simple, but they carried promise. For the first time, hope felt less like foolishness and more like possibility. Monday morning arrived with a bitter wind sweeping across the valley. Georgia stood at the fence line, watching cattle move slowly toward the north pasture. Every fence post, every stretch of land, carried memory. Her father teaching her to mend wire. Her mother laughing on the porch before illness carried her away. Summers that felt endless. And now, uncertainty. Behind her, hoofbeats approached. She didn't turn. Immediately, She already knew who it was. Xander dismounted and tied his horse to the rail before walking toward her. "I spoke with the bank manager," he said. She faced him fully then, searching his expression, and "he's willing to restructure the debt." Her breath stalled. "On what condition?" "That a significant payment is made up front. Enough to show good faith. The remainder would be paid over time." Flickered in her chest stand. Fear followed quickly behind it. "How significant?" she asked carefully. He told her the amount. Her eyes widened. "That's nearly everything you've built." "It's most of it," he admitted. "You could lose your shop." "Yes." The wind pressed against them, sharp and cold. "I won't allow you to sacrifice your future for mine," she said firmly. He stepped closer, his voice steady. "This isn't sacrifice. It's investment." "In what?" "In you, in this ranch. In something that matters." Emotion rose too quickly for her to suppress. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he replied quietly. "I know you're not selling because you want to. You're selling because you feel cornered." She looked away, toward the horizon. "I don't want to owe you." "You wouldn't?" "How can you say that?" "Because I'm not offering charity," he said. "I'm offering partnership." The words settled between them, heavier than before. Georgia felt the meaning behind its shared work, shared risk, shared future. "That's not something you offer lightly," she said. "I don't take it lightly." Silence stretched. "What if this fails?" she whispered. "What if drought comes again? What if cattle prices fall? What if we lose everything anyway?" He didn't hesitate. "Then we lose it, together." Her heart pounded against her ribs. No one had stood beside her like that since her father passed. Friends had offered sympathy. Neighbors had offered advice. But no one had offered to shoulder the burden. "You deserve something easier," she murmured. He gave a faint smile. Easy never built anything worth keeping. The truth of it made her laugh softly, despite herself. They walked toward the barn, discussing numbers, cattle sales, potential improvements. Georgia realized how naturally their thoughts aligned, how his practical mindset balanced her instinctive understanding of the land. Inside the barn, sunlight filtered through cracks in the boards. "This ranch doesn't need saving," Xander said, running a hand along a beam. "It needs adapting. Lease part of the south pasture, diversify the herd, improve fencing gradually." "You sound like you've already decided," she said. "I have." She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the quiet determination in his eyes. "Why are you so certain?" she asked. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. "Because the first day you walked into my shop," he said softly, "I saw someone fighting not to break." Her breath caught. "I've spent years repairing things other men discarded," he continued. "But some things aren't broken. They're just under strain." She felt tears threaten, but held them back. "And you think I'm under strain?" she asked. "I think you're stronger than you believe." The barn felt smaller. Suddenly, the air warmer. She closed the distance between them. "If we do this," she said quietly, "there's no turning back." "I know. And you won't resent me if it costs you everything." "I won't." Her hand rose to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her palm. "Then, let's choose to hold on," she whispered. He covered her hand with his. Not just a promise, a decision. Outside, the wind shifted direction, and for the first time in weeks, Georgia felt something unfamiliar settle inside her. Not dread, but hope. Wednesday morning came quiet and cold. Mist hung low over the pasture, and the sun barely warmed the ground as Georgia checked the fences. Every post, every rail, seemed heavier today. It wasn't just the early hour, or the chilt, was the weight of 2 weeks of uncertainty pressing on her chest. Xander rode up from the north pasture, his horse's hooves stirring dew from the grass. He tied the reins to the rail, then walked to her, wiping his gloved hands on his trousers. "Bank's ready," he said simply. Georgia looked at him, searching his expression. "It's really going to work." He nodded. "We've arranged the payment. They're restructuring the debt." Caldwell withdrew his offer. "The ranch stays Whitaker land." Relief washed over her so strongly she could barely breathe. I don't know what to say." "Say what you feel," he said. "I'm used to listening, not expecting thanks." She let out a shaky laugh. "I feel everything. Gratitude, relief, disbelief, and something else, he prompted, tilting his head. Her eyes softened as she stepped closer. Hope. I feel hope again. Xander studied her for a long moment. He had repaired saddles, mended bridles, stitched torn leather, but repairing hearts was a craft he was still learning. Yet seeing her now, standing proud, yet vulnerable, he understood something deeper. Some bonds weren't stitched with thread, they were earned in trust, patience, and shared struggle. They walked together, across the yard toward the barn, the early sunlight catching the edges of the roof and the worn fence posts. Each step felt lighter than it had in weeks, the tension of impending loss melting away. I have to admit something, Georgia said, glancing at him sideways. I didn't know if I could face Caldwell or the bank alone. You don't have to, he replied. Not ever. A quiet settled over them, filled only by the distant lowing of cattle and the whispering wind across the valley. For a moment, the world felt wide and still, as though the land itself had been holding its breath. You've done more than save a ranch, Xander, Georgia said softly. You've reminded me what it feels like to believe in someone again. He smiled faintly, heart tightening. And you've reminded me why I fight to repair what matters, instead of walking away. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I was afraid I'd have to do this all alone, but with you. You don't have to, he said again, covering her hand with his. We're in this together. For the first time in a long while, Georgia allowed herself to lean on someone. Not just for the ranch, but for the trust she'd held back. The grief she'd carried silently. The fear of losing everything that mattered. Xander pulled her close, feeling the warmth of her against him. The wind tugged at their coats, whispered across the valley, but they didn't notice. Around them, the land was intact. The cattle grazed peacefully, and the old barn stood strong. What had been fragile was now secure, stitched together by effort, courage, and faith in each other. They've stayed there for a long moment, silent, except for the shared rhythm of their breathing. The West had taken so much from them both, yet somehow it had given back what truly mattered: trust, hope, and the beginnings of love. Finally, Georgia lifted her face to his. Thank you, she whispered. Xander pressed his forehead to hers. No, thank you. For letting me in. The sun climbed higher, bathing the valley in gold. Broken leather could be repaired. Broken fences could be rebuilt. And broken hearts sometimes could be mended with patience, care, and a promise kept. The Whitaker Ranch was still standing, and so were they. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.